Details, 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 right? As I look around this room, I feel like I'm with my people. So we're detail people, and in a sense, we're invisible people. If you do your jobs well, you create mounts that are basically invisible. That's something Philip taught me. You strive to have your work not noticed. So my background is not in mount making. My background is in engineering. Engineers design all manner of boring things, and if we design them well, they just fade into the background of everyday life. So you think about somewhere in New York, maybe in MoMA right now, there's a little rubber flap in a toilet tank, right, and it's closing. You think about all the catalytic converters that are underneath the cars in Chicago. They're backed up on the Skyway, right? You think about the pump that brings water from the one visible intake crib on Lake Erie to the Baldwin water treatment plant. It's about 2.4 miles from here, where they clean it, and then they send it here so we can drink it. On a daily basis, we don't really notice any of those things unless they're not working right. So the first time a homeowner might notice that little rubber flap in their toilet is when they hear that noise and they know the water is running, and it's running, and it's running. Why? And for the first time, they open up that little lid on the tank and they see, oh, look at that. The first time you notice the catalytic converter in your car in Ohio might be when you're trying to pass the e-check to see if you can keep your car licensed, right? The first time that you hear about your water treatment plant in the news, that's not a good thing. You better go stock up on some bottled water. Oh my gosh, this is a fancy remote. I'm going to try this button. Oh, thank goodness. So we've all read about, how many of us have read about what happened to the water in Flint, Michigan, here in the States? Okay. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the background. The news stories told us that the city council in Flint, Michigan voted in 2013 to switch where the city got its water. So they used to purchase water from Detroit, but the city council in Flint, they wanted to save some money. The water costs were very high, so they decided to have the Carignan Water Authority, that's the water authority in that area, they told them, hey, start filtering water from the Flint River over there in Flint, Michigan. And as you may know, the results were actually quite tragic. Flint citizens ended up with toxic amounts of lead in their water in quite a few places. So if we look at where to point the blame, one might say, well, let's point the blame at that city council for making that decision, right? Well, you're details people, so let's dig a little deeper. As you might have read, the water in the Flint River wasn't the source of the lead. And actually, the water authority was testing the water that came out of the water treatment plant, and there wasn't any lead there either. So if the lead wasn't coming from the Flint River, and it wasn't coming from the water treatment plant, why was it coming out of people's faucets? So you might know the answer, but I want to jump forward a little bit. Many of you know the answer already. Let's take a look at this symbol for lead from the periodic table. Does anybody know why it's PB? Just raise your hand. I want to see. We see a couple. So you know that it's from plumbarius, the Latin word for plumber, right? This photo is going to help. For thousands of years, since the times of the Romans, basically, we've put lead into the different alloys that make up water pipes. And we've also used lead for soldering. It wets beautifully. It goes into the pipe cracks beautifully. It seals it nicely. When it's in an alloy, it prevents the alloy from cracking and fatiguing and breaking over time. So we've done that for a very long time. So the lead in Flint's water turned out to be coming right from people's own faucets and the pipes that have been in their homes for many years. But wait a minute. So they were getting water from Detroit, and everything was fine. The lead was in their pipes, but the lead wasn't coming out of those pipes. So why did it change when they switched to using water from the Flint River? Now, some of you are going to know the answer, but take a look at this example here. On my right here, up above, is a very clean-looking nail. That's a nail that's been soaked in water from Lake Huron. That's where Detroit gets its water. And on the bottom, or on the left, that's a nail that's been soaked, and this is for 1 month, soaked in the Flint River water. So the difference is not subtle, right? You can imagine what would happen if there was lead in that material. So this is what happened. The lead leached out of the pipes just before it came out of the faucet. So we're always wondering when we see these national tragedies, where do we point the blame, right? That's the easy question to ask. So you could say that the builders of those homes, we've known lead's been toxic for, gosh, almost 500, 800 years. Why did they put it in those pipes? So let's keep going on this. This is not a new problem. We know that there's lead in the pipes, and we know we don't want it to come out of the pipes because we don't like to drink water with lead in it, right? So solutions have actually been around since 1921, when sodium silicate was first used in England to control, you guessed it, lead in the drinking water. So in actuality, in Flint, Michigan, they would have probably used a different one called orthophosphate. That would have been more appropriate for the specifics there. But in either case, the Water Authority should have known to neutralize the corrosive water by adding what are called corrosion inhibitors. So that would have prevented the lead from being leached into the pipes. Would have prevented the lead from being leached out of the pipes and into the drinking water. So this is the standard practice in water treatment plants around the world. You add those corrosion inhibitors in situations just like this. So the Water Authority didn't do that. So if we're looking again, it's a national tragedy, and we're always wondering, in some sense, where to place the blame. It's the easy question. So could we blame the Water Authority for not adding those corrosion inhibitors? We could, but we're detail people. Let's go a little bit further into the story. So it turns out that the regional EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, knew about this problem, and they told the local authorities, that's called the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ, so they told them about the problem. Hey, look out. This is a problem. But the Water Authority, they knew that they were going to switch the water source again in another 12 months, and they didn't do anything about it. They said, you know what, we're going to switch it in a year. Let's just monitor the situation and see if it gets any worse. Could you imagine doing that in your work? Could you imagine if your boss came to you and said, hey, I've got this new kind of material to put in a mount. Why don't you go ahead and use it in everything? And you read a report that said, gosh, that might cause scratching, it might cause staining, it might cause the material of the piece or the artifact to decompose. And your boss said, nah, just do it for a year and see what happens, right? Imagine if an engineer did that. Imagine if someone was designing a bridge. Imagine you're designing a bridge. Imagine you're a civil engineer, and you design the bridge, and you have a minimum acceptable ultimate yield strength for the steel that you use in the bridge. And as the steel is coming in, you're testing it, and you're finding out, oh, it's not meeting that minimum acceptable ultimate yield strength. And imagine your boss says, it's a bridge. It's boring. Just try it and see if it works, right? We would not do that, by the way. Gosh, I hope so. So that's clearly not the right approach, but it is what the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality told the Water Authority to do. And the EPA, who knew about that problem, they didn't override the local authority and compel the Water Authority to actually fix the problem. So could we point the blame at those two governmental organizations? Yeah? Well, let's keep going here. One question I haven't seen addressed in the newspapers is the question of why the Flint River was more corrosive. If you remember a couple slides ago, we looked at those two nails, and one was so much more corroded than the other. Well, Detroit gets its water from Lake Huron, right? That's the big lake over here on the right. And that's actually where the Flint River flows into. So these two bodies of water, they've been part of the same water system for thousands of years, if not tens of thousands of years. So why is the water in the Flint River more corrosive than the water in Lake Huron? Details. Does anyone know the answer? It could be that Lake Huron has some kind of mineral deposits in it. It could be that there's some kind of maybe decomposing organic matter that's contributing to acidity. So I'm going to give you a hint now as to what the answer was. Ohioans are going to know what it is. Michiganders too. The answer turns out to be road salt. So in the US, we started using salt to de-ice the roads for the first time in the 1940s. If you're wondering what we did before then, we would just push the snow out of the way and we would put down sand, and we would get some traction from that. Just sand. And then we figured out, well, you know, if we put down that the salt, it's going to melt the ice, and the roads are more clear. Now, since we've done that, since we've started to use salt to de-ice the roads, traffic accidents nationwide have gone down nationwide. So I'm not even counting just the parts of the country that have snow. I'm talking about even if you count in Arizona and Texas and places where they're not getting any snow. Nationwide, accidents went down 88%. And injuries and fatalities went down 85%. This is big. That was a seemingly good decision. If you look at it per numbers, putting salt on the roads saves more lives per year than firefighting or a number of other things which we consider to be really good things. So the downside, of course, as we're learning, is that the sodium chloride, the salt, it causes the runoff, which gets into the river, and that increased salinity, that increased salt content in the water, causes the water to be more electrically conductive. And then what happens? Then you get increased galvanic corrosion, which leaches the lead into the water. So how effective is salt water at removing the lead from metal pipes? It turns out that if you run, let's pretend you ran a silver ore refinery. So you're getting the stuff from the ground, this ore, and your job is to take out the lead. Your job is to take out molybdenum. Your job is to take out these other earth metals. It actually turns out that the standard procedure for removing lead from ore is to apply salt water. So it's that effective. It's that effective. But it's not new, right? This effect has been known about since the 70s. And nationwide, especially in parts of the country where there's a lot of snow, transportation authorities have been looking into alternative de-icers that won't contribute to this kind of problem. So there's many other alternative de-icers that exist out there. And the Flint Transportation Authority, the people that are in charge of adding that salt to the road, they could have used one of those alternatives and prevented this whole thing from happening in the first place. So are they at fault, right? Well, now at least we have the whole picture. So the home builders in Flint and around the world have been using lead pipes for some time, up until about the 1980s, even though we knew it was toxic. The Transportation Authority chose to apply the sodium chloride to the road, even though they knew what the effects would be. The Water Authority noticed the salt in the water, but they didn't add those corrosion inhibitors because the regional government said, just monitor it for a year and see what happens. So why didn't any of those groups do something about the problem? The lead continued the poisoning the people of Flint for over a year until a civil engineering professor from Virginia Tech, right, how many states over is that? 4 states over, blew the whistle and brought all of this to the media's attention nationwide. So that is the whole story. There's a lot of details. So getting back to the present, right? I'm at a conference of some of the world's most talented mount makers. What does any of this story of the Flint River have to do with mount making? So I want to ask you something. Where is the world's authority on mount making? Right? Where is the one book that will tell you how to be the world's best mount maker? I don't think there is a book like that. You come to conferences like this, you subscribe to trade publications, you talk with other mount makers, and you become your own authority. You're detail-oriented people. You're curious. You're detailed people. You want to know all of the dangers out there that are waiting to harm a piece and how to protect against them, right? So when the Terracotta Army came through San Francisco's Asian Art Museum, Vincent Avalos didn't wait for someone to say, hey, Vincent, you're in California. You've got to think about those earthquakes, right? He didn't need someone to tell him that. When Philip here, who I've had a good occasion to meet many times, when Philip here at the CMA prepares a mount like that beautiful tent, he didn't wait for someone to say, hey, you know what, think about how the Velcro is going to affect that felt. Maybe you want to use that other system that you saw, right? You can talk to others, but ultimately it's your call. The buck stops with you. And this is how, in my mind, that we're similar. In the story of the Flint water crisis, any of those groups could have stood up and done something about it, from the Transportation Authority all the way up to the regional EPA. They all could have done something about it. And to me, this is what makes people like mount makers and engineers different. On a daily basis, you don't wait for people to tell you the right way to do things. You search out the right way to do things and you do it. You keep yourselves educated, you re-educate yourself through conferences like this, you invent better ways of doing things, and in those talks like the one I just heard, you share those better ways of doing things with others. You share those innovations. You test out your ideas experimentally. We saw Philip's group practicing how they're going to hang it before they actually went to hang it. You test things out before you test it out on the real artifact. You can be open to ideas from everyone, but ultimately, you deliver the ultimate verdict. Just like that civil engineering professor who blew the whistle on the lead in the Flint River, or in the Flint water, you take it upon yourself to assure the safety of thousands of years of cultural history. And so for that, I salute you. So I'm going to switch gears now. The story that brought me here today begins a wee 1,500 years ago in a fishing village called Phnom Da in southern Cambodia. There's a Hindu legend that says that the deity Krishna, when a storm threatened his people, lifted India's Mount Govardhana, to shield the villagers from the rain. So you can see here in this picture, he's lifting a mountain. I think he's 7 years old. I wasn't doing that when I was 7, but there he is. So he protected the villagers from rain, which lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. This legend has been depicted widely in many different art forms, including a 6-foot-tall, 2,000-pound stone statue, sculpted in the 6th century and now owned by the Cleveland Museum of Art. So the original artist or artists whose names have just been lost to time, there's no way they could have imagined the journey that this sculpture was to take. Cambodia was ruled by Hindu kings for many centuries, and Hinduism was the main religion of the country before Buddhism took over. Today, more than 90% of Cambodians are Buddhists. What happened to those Hindu temples? Over time, they were overgrown by vegetation, and they began to be absorbed into the earth. Then in 1912, about 1,400 years after it was carved, a French team working in Phnom Da excavated a Krishna statue, or specifically they excavated the torso and the head, which made its way to Saigon, then Marseille, and eventually it was sold to Léonce Rosenberg, a prominent art dealer in Paris. By 1920, these sections of Krishna came into the collection of Adolphe Stocklet, a Belgian engineer and industrialist who featured the work in an amazingly expensive home in Brussels. Stocklet attempted to reassemble the sculpture using other pieces that French archaeologists found in 1935 after further explorations of the site. So he and his next-door neighbor, Marcel Wolfers, were out there in the yard trying to lift hundreds or thousands of pounds of stone into the air and just trying to figure out which piece went where. So eventually, probably not too long after, they realized this was an overwhelming task and not one that they were going to continue. So they gave up. The head and the torso were put on display in the stage room of Stocklet's palace, and the remaining pieces, they ended up next door, buried or used as edging in Wolfer's garden. Can you imagine that? They would remain there for 4 decades. The Cleveland Museum of Art bought the Krishna head and torso from Stocklet in the 70s, about 60 years after its discovery. The museum's curator for Southeast Asian art, Stan Zuma, he knew from the French archaeological reports that there were missing legs, feet, and arms, and they had been sent to Belgium, but he didn't quite know where. He was determined to find them. So he eventually did discover the many pieces that were buried in the garden in Brussels, right next door to where the museum had purchased the head and the torso. Then he had to convince the new owners of Wolfer's garden to let them do an archaeological dig in their garden, which he did. The pieces were then excavated and they were flown to Cleveland. During the dig, they discovered they had many more legs and arms than Krishna needed. So in 1978, the museum carefully tried to select the right matches for the torso out of this lot of pieces, and they achieved a great deal of success. They matched the legs and the feet to the torso and head, and they reassembled those into a more complete sculpture, which has been one of the prides of the museum ever since. So now jump forward a couple decades into 2005. All those extra pieces were sitting around. They actually ended up sending them to Cambodia to assist in reassembling other sculptural fragments that were discovered more recently in Phnom Da. So notice the raised arm to the right in the photograph. That's the arm that would have been holding up that mountain. So it's a nearly complete sculpture here, but we're definitely missing a hand, an arm, and a mountain. Take a look at this photograph. So interestingly, there was a 432-pound fragment containing a hand and a mountain that Krishna was holding up. that actually was part of the shipment that went back to Cambodia. So the authorities there attached it to a different Krishna torso, in spite of there being no point of contact between the two. And so it went on tour as part of another sculpture. Now, if you look at this, you can see that hand is just about twice as big as the head. It's wildly out of proportion. And you could guess, a reasonable person could see that it didn't belong to the rest of the sculpture. Now jump forward one more decade. It's 2014. Sonia Quintanilla is the new curator of Southeast Asian art here at the CMA. Sonia collaborated with the head stone conservator at the National Museum of Cambodia and a material scientist over at UCLA in California to perform a petrological analysis of the stone, which showed that this very hand, made of sandstone, matched the exact crystalline structure of the sandstone seen in the head and torso owned by the CMA. So excited by this, Sonia and the CMA gained permission from the Cambodian authorities to conduct a 3D scan of that hand and mountain while it was on exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. So they fly out to New York and they hire a team to do a 3D scan of that hand and that mountain. So now they've got a 3D scan of the hand and the mountain. Now they need to do a 3D scan of the head and torso and see if these pieces really match. And that is where I get the chance to enter this remarkable story. I manage an innovation center and a makerspace just a few blocks away here at Case Western Reserve University. It's called Thinkbox. So this is a 7-story, 50,000 square foot paradise for anyone who loves to make things. There's a metal shop, there's a wood shop, there is laser cutting, there's 3D printing, there's textiles, there's electronics, you name it. One of the unique things about Thinkbox, even though it's at a private university, this is free and it's open to the public. This is free and it's open to the public. So with those doors wide open, in walks Philip Brutz, a Mountmaker from the CMA, who wanted to see what machines and resources were waiting for him in Thinkbox. He introduces himself to our staff and he sees our 3D scanner. It's a very high-end 3D scanning arm made by Romer. So Philip then connects us to Sonia, who is in need of this 3D scanning. Two of my staff members, Ben Genrich and Marcus Brathwaite, would then spend days very carefully scanning the sculpture at extremely high resolutions and cleaning up the scan file. Working together with Sonia's team and their deep knowledge of these sculptures, they attempted to make a match using digital manipulation of the heavy stone pieces that wasn't possible in the 1970s. I can tell you it's much easier to rotate that 432-pound mountain fragment on a screen than it is to rotate it in real life. And here you can see the results. Using the digital method, we found the fragment was a likely match. We knew from the petrological analysis that it was a likely match, but we wanted more confidence. So to further verify the match, 2 plastic replicas were created using 3D printing. There's a scale model on the left over there with Sonia, and 1 life-size model. So take a look at the life-size model on the right. You can see the strut that's coming out from the mountain piece perfectly matching the torso piece. They match at both scales. So armed with all this knowledge, Sonia and the CMA director, Bill Griswold, flew to Cambodia to meet with leaders there, and they were able to obtain release of the matching fragment, which has arrived at the museum now. You can see it in this photo, and will be reunited with the sculpture for the first time in the hundreds of years since the pieces were separated. Work on making and obtaining the necessary mounts for the new reconstruction of Krishna is underway here at the Objects Conservation Lab, and the finished monolith, which will reach 9 feet in height, I'm told, will be unveiled to the public in a special focus exhibition once the work is complete, probably by mid-2018. I got to learn a lot in this process. I came to understand other stories of artifacts and pieces that have survived wars, cultural revolutions, colonial acquisitions. These are stories with every manner of twists and turns. I met people like Philip and Dante and Sonia. Sonia can understand those ancient inscriptions on the sculptures, and for me, who is not familiar with this field, it seemed a lot like Indiana Jones. I was very, very impressed. So stories like these get made into movies, but more importantly, they helped us connect with the past in ways that can help prevent nations from repeating the tragic mistakes of history. They tell me that we have to stop hoping for better yesterdays but with your work, with your ability to actually repair certain mistakes that have been made in the past, it gives me hope not only that we'll be able to preserve these important artifacts for the future, but in a sense, it also makes me think that a better yesterday is still possible. Thank you.